Officer James Carter had always believed that true loyalty wasn't something you could teach. It was something you had to earn. When he was partnered with Max, a young German shepherd fresh out of training, James immediately saw something different in him. Max wasn't just another K9 officer. He was sharp, brave, and fiercely protective. Over time, James realized Max wasn't just his partner. He was becoming family. At home, Max was more than a working dog. To 8-year-old Ethan, Max was a superhero in fur. Every morning, Ethan would race down the stairs, his small arms wrapping around Max's neck. The dog would patiently endure Ethan's endless chatter, his clumsy hugs, and the occasional dressing up with superhero capes. Max never once pulled away. It was as if he understood that Ethan needed him just as much as James did. Neighbors often joked that Max was the third member of the Carter family. Wherever they went, whether it was the grocery store, the park, or the town's summer fair, James, Ethan, and Max were always together. They turned heads not because of the uniform or the badge, but because of the warmth that surrounded them. It was rare to see a partnership so pure. James would often tell Ethan that Max wasn't just a dog. He was a protector, trained to sense fear, to calm storms, to keep nightmares at bay. Ethan didn't fully understand at the time, but he believed his dad. After all, whenever Ethan had a bad dream, Max would somehow know. The dog would slip into his room, nudge his hand, and curl up beside him until morning. What few people knew was that James had worked privately with Max to help him become more than just a K9 officer. He had trained Max to recognize the subtle signs of Ethan's anxiety, the tapping of his foot, the sudden stillness in his voice, the way his small shoulders would tense. James wanted Ethan to grow up feeling safe, even when he wasn't around. Looking back, those quiet moments mattered most. They weren't filled with grand speeches or big gestures. Just a boy, his dad, and a dog who understood things no one else could see. In those small, everyday routines, Max waiting at the school bus stop, Max sitting patiently during homework, Max resting his head on Ethan's lap during movie nights, a bond was formed. A bond so deep that when tragedy struck, it would be the only thing strong enough to hold Ethan together. And in ways no one could predict, that bond would soon be tested in ways neither boy nor dog was ready for. It was an ordinary Tuesday, or so it seemed. The kind of day that began like any other. The sun shining through the window, birds chirping in the backyard, and the smell of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen. Ethan was running late for school, his backpack half-zipped and his shoes on the wrong feet. He was still adjusting to the loss of his father's morning routine. The little things, like the way James would give him a quick kiss on the forehead before sending him out the door. But then the phone rang. It wasn't the usual call. This one sounded different. The urgency in the officer's voice was unmistakable, even though James had been trained to keep calm in the face of danger. "We need you at the scene, Carter," the dispatcher had said. "It's urgent." Ethan didn't know it then, but that was the last time he would hear his father's voice. James grabbed his uniform, kissed Ethan goodbye, or at least, that's what Ethan thought he'd done. The kiss was brief, a whisper of a goodbye in the chaos of getting out the door. Max, ever loyal, followed James as he walked out of the house, the dog's heavy paws echoing in the driveway. They were heading to a robbery in progress, a situation that had escalated beyond what anyone could handle. But James was fearless, the kind of man who always put others first, even if it meant walking into the danger zone. The sirens blared in the distance as James' squad car sped toward the scene. Max's fur bristled with anticipation, as if he could sense the tension building. They'd faced dangerous situations before, but this one felt different. The robbery had gone awry, and the suspects were armed and desperate. James and Max, as usual, were the first to arrive. A standoff ensued, and in the chaos that followed, a gunshot rang out. The scene was chaotic, the shots loud and relentless. Max, always by James' side, leaped into action, trying to protect his partner. But it was too late. James had been struck. It was a silent moment that no one would ever forget. The police officers who had arrived on the scene couldn't believe it. James, the man they had all respected, was gone. Max, in his instinctual loyalty, was there, his eyes wide with confusion and pain. The canine wasn't just a dog in that moment. He was a witness to tragedy, a partner lost in the line of duty. Back at the house, Ethan waited for his dad to come home, as he did every day. But the hours passed, and the knock on the door came instead. The news was as crushing as it was unreal. Officer James Carter, the hero of the town, was gone. And so, too, would be Max, the one constant that had always been there. Ethan couldn't understand what had happened. He was too young to process the depth of the loss. All he knew was that his world had shattered in an instant, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days that followed James' funeral blurred together for Ethan. The world seemed to slow down, as if everything was happening in a dream. His mother, Rachel, tried to comfort him, but the weight of their loss was suffocating. Her tears were constant, and so were Ethan's. They missed James with a depth neither of them could put into words. Max was another story. The loyal canine, once a steady and unwavering presence in their home, now wandered around the house in confusion. He would lay by the front door, staring out into the empty driveway, waiting for his handler to return. Ethan knew that Max was feeling the same emptiness. The dog would nudge Ethan gently with his nose, as if trying to tell him that everything would be okay. But Ethan didn't believe it. Nothing would ever be okay again. The funeral had been hard for everyone in town. People came from all over to pay their respects, to honor James' memory. But even in the midst of the mourning, there was a reality that no one could escape. Max, the hero dog, couldn't stay. Department policy dictated that once an officer passed away, their canine partner had to be retired and rehomed, or in some cases, sold at public auction. Ethan didn't understand why this had to happen. Max had been his father's partner, but he was also his protector. The dog wasn't just a pet. He was family. Ethan couldn't bear the thought of losing him too. One evening, as Rachel tried to explain what would happen to Max, Ethan's small voice interrupted her. "I'm going to buy him back," he said, his words quiet but filled with determination. Rachel was taken aback. She knew Ethan was struggling, but she hadn't expected this. "Ethan, honey, the auction will probably go higher than what we can afford. You're too young." But Ethan wasn't listening. He already knew what he had to do. He didn't have much, just the few coins and dollar bills he had managed to save from birthday gifts and doing small chores around the house. But it didn't matter. It wasn't about the money. He needed Max, and he was willing to do whatever it took to keep him. Rachel looked at her son, his wide eyes filled with a resolve that both broke her heart and made her proud. He was young, but the loss of his father had forced him to grow up faster than anyone could have imagined. "I'll find a way," Ethan said quietly, though Rachel wasn't sure if he meant it as a promise to her or to himself. But in that moment, she knew that her son wasn't going to give up. And neither would Max. Ethan's determination grew stronger with each passing day. He began to save every penny he could find. Every coin he scrounged up, every dollar he earned from mowing the neighbor's lawn, went into a small envelope he kept hidden under his bed. His mother, Rachel, watched as her son worked tirelessly, spending hours in the yard, doing chores, and even setting up a lemonade stand on the corner of their street. The neighbors who had already shown so much kindness were now more than willing to help. Rachel, however, was worried. She tried to explain to Ethan that the auction was a formal process, that the bidding would likely go higher than they could ever afford. She even considered selling some of their belongings, but deep down, she knew it wouldn't be enough. The thought of losing Max, the last piece of James that remained, was too painful to bear. Yet she didn't want to discourage her son either. His grief was so raw, so unrelenting, that she couldn't bring herself to say no. One evening after school, Ethan sat at the kitchen table, counting the money he had earned. Rachel watched quietly from the doorway. He had made a small fortune, about $82, an impressive amount for a boy his age, but still nowhere near what the auction would demand. She knew it, and yet, seeing the look on his face as he clutched the envelope, she couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way. The next day, the notice for the auction arrived. It was a bittersweet moment for Rachel, as the letter informed them that Max would be auctioned off in just 3 days. Ethan was already planning, researching how much Max's training and service would add to his value, but Rachel knew they needed more time. The thought of parting with Max was unbearable, but the harsh reality was settling in. This was the way things had to be. On the morning of the auction, Ethan dressed in his best clothes, even though they were a little too big. His mother could tell he had barely slept. His eyes were puffy from crying the night before. But there was no doubt in his mind that he was going to buy Max. Rachel hesitated. She had no idea how this would end, but seeing the resolve in Ethan's eyes reminded her that sometimes the things you love are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. She didn't know if they could win this battle, but she wasn't about to take that hope from him. As they drove to the town hall, Ethan held the envelope tight in his hands, his heart beating fast. He had no idea what was going to happen next, but there was one thing he was certain of. Max was his family, and he would do whatever it took to bring him home. The town hall was filled with a buzz of conversation, an unusual mixture of excitement and sadness. People gathered in small groups, chatting quietly, their eyes occasionally darting toward the front of the room where the auctioneer stood, ready to begin. There were other items up for bid that day: old furniture, antiques, even a few pieces of artwork. But the air was heavy with anticipation for one particular sale: Max, the retired K9. Ethan could hardly sit still. His small hands gripped the envelope tightly, as if holding on to his last shred of hope. His mother, Rachel, walked beside him, her face a mask of concern and quiet strength. She had done her best to prepare him for the possibility that they might not win the bid, but deep down, she could see how much this meant to him, to both of them. As they found seats in the front row, Ethan's eyes never left Max, who was being kept at the side of the stage. The dog sat obediently, his tail wagging slightly, but there was a sadness in his eyes. It was as if Max knew what was happening, that he too was waiting for something that would decide his future. The auctioneer stood up, tapping the gavel lightly to draw attention. He called for silence as he began the opening statements, explaining how Max had served the community for years, keeping everyone safe and serving with unparalleled loyalty. The crowd listened attentively, some nodding in respect for the bond that had been formed between Officer and K9. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The auctioneer announced Max's turn. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special sale today. Max, the K9 officer, retired and up for adoption. He has served this town with honor, and now it's time for him to move on. Let's start the bidding at $500. A collective gasp ran through the crowd. Everyone knew that Max's training, his history, and his bond with Officer Carter would make him worth much more. The bids started flying, each person raising their paddle higher and higher. Ethan felt his heart race as the numbers soared, way past what he could afford. $2,000, called one bidder, and then another raised his paddle. $3,000. Ethan's face fell as he watched the price climb out of reach. The envelope in his lap felt heavier and heavier. His mind raced. What could he do? The money he had worked so hard for seemed so small compared to the growing amount on the auction board. But then, something remarkable happened. The bidders slowed down. One by one, they stopped raising their paddles. Whispers ran through the crowd, and for a brief moment, everyone was silent. The auctioneer hesitated, looking out over the crowd before making his next announcement. "Max, ladies and gentlemen," he said, "will be sold to the young boy sitting right here in the front row." The room fell completely still. Everyone turned to look at Ethan, whose eyes were wide with disbelief. The auctioneer smiled warmly, as if he knew something no one else did. For the price in that young man's envelope. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Could this really happen? Rachel, too, was stunned. She had expected a much different outcome, but there was a kindness in the air, an unspoken understanding that sometimes love is the highest bidder. The room was filled with stunned silence. For a moment, no one knew what to say or do. Ethan sat frozen, his wide eyes locked on the auctioneer, trying to process the words that had just been spoken. And he heard that right. The whole room was staring at him, but it felt like time had slowed down. Rachel's heart raced as she looked at her son. She had hoped, but never imagined this would actually happen. Was this some sort of mistake? The thought of the auctioneer offering Max to Ethan for the price of his envelope seemed too good to be true. But the kind smile on the auctioneer's face told her otherwise. He wasn't joking. This was real. Ethan's small hands shook as he stood up slowly, the envelope in his grip. He couldn't believe it. It wasn't just a sale. It was Max, his dad's partner, his protector, his friend, and Max was going to stay with him. Max wasn't going to be sold to another person. He wasn't going to leave him. The auctioneer, seeing the hesitation, gave a nod. "Go ahead, young man. You can come up here to claim him." With a trembling breath, Ethan walked up to the stage, his heart pounding. The audience watched, some with smiles, others in awe of what they were witnessing. This was no ordinary auction. This was a moment that would be remembered forever. As Ethan reached the stage, Max stood up and bounded toward him, tail wagging furiously. The dog had been watching the whole exchange with his intelligent eyes, and now he seemed to recognize the boy he had protected for so long. Without hesitation, Max leaped into Ethan's arms, as if understanding that the bond between them would never be broken. The room erupted into applause. Ethan laughed, tears streaming down his face as Max licked his cheek in a joyful, frantic manner. For the first time since his father's death, Ethan felt something other than emptiness. He felt whole again. Rachel stood behind him, wiping away her own tears. She had watched her son go through so much grief in such a short time, but seeing Ethan and Max together again, seeing the love and connection between them, was more powerful than words could express. This wasn't just a victory for Ethan. It was a victory for everyone who understood the importance of love, loyalty, and family. The auctioneer handed the leash to Ethan, who took it with a sense of pride and relief. The deal had been sealed, and Max was officially his. Ethan's promise had been kept. Against all odds, he had brought Max home. As they walked off the stage together, Ethan leaned down to whisper to Max, his voice thick with emotion, "We're home, buddy. We're home." And with that, the town witnessed not just the rescue of a canine, but the restoration of a young boy's heart. As Ethan and Max walked out of the auction hall, the crowd that had gathered for the event stood to their feet, applauding the young boy and his loyal dog. The applause was heartfelt, but it wasn't just for the boy's determination. It was for the love, the connection, and the unbreakable bond that had been formed between them, one that had survived tragedy and loss. Rachel walked alongside them, her heart swelling with pride and relief. She hadn't expected this outcome, not in a million years, and yet here they were, walking out of the auction hall together, Max by Ethan's side, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. Their family, once broken by grief, was whole again. As they stepped outside into the crisp evening air, reporters from the local news rushed over to interview Ethan. The story of the young boy fighting to bring his father's canine partner home had captured the hearts of the entire town. Ethan was quiet, his voice barely a whisper as the cameras turned toward him. "Why did you want to buy Max?" one reporter asked, kneeling down to his level, microphone in hand. Ethan looked down at Max, who had sat by his side, his tail gently wagging. He hesitated, his eyes welling with tears. This wasn't just a simple question. It was the question that Ethan had been asking himself every day since his father's death. Max wasn't just a dog to Ethan. He wasn't just a police officer's partner. Max was the last piece of his father that remained. When James had been killed in the line of duty, Ethan's world had been torn apart. His father was gone, and with him, the sense of safety and security that had always been there. But Max had always been there too. Max had comforted him on the hardest nights, when the pain was unbearable and the fear of losing everything consumed him. He helped me, Ethan said, his voice breaking slightly. He helped me when I couldn't sleep at night, when I was scared, when I thought I was alone. Max, he's not just a dog, he's my family, and I needed to bring him home. The reporter's eyes softened as he listened. There was an understanding in the air, one that couldn't be captured in words, but could be felt in the silent moments between them. Ethan wasn't just fighting for a dog. He was fighting for the last piece of his dad. for the only thing that could make him feel safe again. As they wrapped up the interview, the crowd slowly began to disperse, but the impact of the moment lingered in the air. Max had been saved not just from the auction block, but from the pain of separation, and in doing so, Ethan had found something priceless: peace. Max wasn't just a protector, he was a reminder. A reminder that love, loyalty, and family never truly leave, even when it feels like they're gone forever. As the weeks passed, life slowly began to find its rhythm again. The days felt quieter, but there was a newfound sense of peace in the Carter household. Ethan had grown a little taller, a little stronger, and his laughter, which had been absent for so long, returned. Max, ever watchful, remained by his side, a constant source of comfort and companionship. Ethan spent hours each day training Max, learning to communicate with him in ways he never had before. They were a team, and they were more connected than ever. Max's instincts were sharp, his skills unmatched, but now there was something more. A deep emotional bond that transcended any training or commands. Rachel watched with a quiet pride as she saw her son heal, piece by piece, with Max by his side. There were still difficult days when the pain of losing James crept in, when memories would flood Ethan's mind and tears would fall. But there was Max, always there to nudge him gently, to offer his quiet support, and to bring Ethan back from the depths of his sorrow. One afternoon, as Ethan and Max walked through the park, a couple approached them. The man smiled warmly, recognizing Max from the news coverage. "Hey, you're the boy who bought Max, right? The one who wouldn't give up." Ethan nodded, his chest swelling with pride. "Yeah, that's me." The man chuckled. "Well, I gotta say I admire you. It's not every day you see someone fight that hard for something they love." Ethan smiled softly. "He's not just something, he's my family." The man's expression softened, and he put a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You're a lucky kid, and Max is lucky to have you too." As the man and his companion walked away, Rachel smiled at Ethan, who was looking down at Max with a look of quiet gratitude. It was in moments like these, in the simple exchanges, the everyday acts of love and care, that the true meaning of family was felt. Ethan's journey had been long and painful, but it had led him to a place of healing. He had fought for Max, not just for himself, but for his father's memory, for the love that still lingered in his heart. And in doing so, he had found his way back from the darkness. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a symbol of resilience, of love, and of the unbreakable bond between a boy and his family. Together, they would face whatever came next, knowing that with love and loyalty, they could overcome anything. And as they walked home, side by side, Ethan knew that no matter what life threw their way, he and Max would face it together as a family.